Temple Bound is going to Africa, and we want you to come with us. November 2nd through the 9th, we have been asked to go to Kenya to help a local group of members of the church go to the temple for the first time. And not only are we looking to help them get to the temple, but we're helping raise money for medical supplies, food, and even some shelter for a local orphanage. So if you'd like to join us, here's how you can do that. Number one, follow us on social media. If you'd like to be a part of it remotely, you can check us out on a daily basis. We're doing podcast episodes while we're over there. Secondly, you can donate. We're going to have a GoFundMe link in the show notes of these episodes over the next 2 months. Or you can literally come with us. We have a limited number of seats, and we'd love for you to come join us in this effort of sharing this great good with members of the church overseas. So if you'd like to learn more, please reach out, and we'd love to have you. For many of us, becoming a temple ordinance worker is something that you do after you're retired or when life slows down. But today we're talking to Bart McDonald, who's going to tell us a different perspective. He shares how right in the middle of building a company, raising a family, and serving the church as a bishop, the Lord invited him to serve in the temple, and how it's changed everything: his schedule, his marriage, his discipleship, and even his heart. So if you've ever wondered whether you have the time to serve in the temple or if that calling is really meant for later in life, this conversation is going to inspire you and make you want to serve. Enjoy the show. You know, Bart, I'm so excited for today's episode because we're going to be talking about another mindset shift in this thing called temple work as an ordinance worker. And I want to talk about this idea of the lesson that you've learned recently as you've become an ordinance worker at the temple in Idaho, and how you think that's transforming the way we can all see our opportunities at the temple. So Bart, let's go ahead and just have you tell the story of how you became an ordinance worker.
Absolutely, Will. Such a fun opportunity to talk about something that's so important in my life, really, as well. So my history was at a really, really busy time in my life. I had the opportunity to serve in my ward as the bishop, and it was an incredible experience and opportunity to serve. I feel like, you know, when Joseph Smith makes that quote about how kind of all hell knocks off this corner and this corner to make him a polished shaft. I mean, that's kind of all of our lives, right? It tells a story for all of us how opportunity plus just adversity at times just polishes us up. And so as I was finishing up serving as the bishop in the ward, there was this kind of emptiness, right? No longer, and I really don't think it was so much about self-importance in a ward scenario. I loved serving and was also happy to have a change at the same time. I think most bishops kind of feel that way. But it was the emptiness of how am I serving the Lord in a meaningful way? And I had ministering. Ministering was great. Loved ministering. But I had such an incredible time for 5 years serving alongside counselors and serving alongside my wife, really, and being able to serve many hours, ward members. And really, when you talk about that, it's really discipleship and serving the Lord. And so I remember talking to a ward member who was a retiree, somebody who was a little bit older, and said, you know, Bart, you should really think about serving in the temple. Do you have time now to serve in the temple? I really didn't. I remember going home from church and kind of thinking about this and being like, no, that's off. It's still not a good time. But you know when the Spirit whispers to your heart, because those ideas, they just don't leave you alone. They kind of come back. And so I kept thinking about it again and again and recognized, though I'm kind of slow at times spiritually, right? The Lord is delivering a message, Bart. You need to figure this out, right? And so I started thinking about becoming an ordinance worker, talked with my wife about it. She was super excited about it, and figured out in my craziness of my work schedule, because we were just building a company and doing all these things.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because that's where you and I initially connected. I think for the audience to get some context on this, I just want to highlight that, so we're both physical therapists. We owned private practices. We still have some ownership, of course, in what we've done, but we went through a journey of growing and scaling practices. We met at events trying to figure out the chaos of owning a business. And just to put it in perspective for all the listeners, healthcare is a completely different business relative to every industry in business because of insurance. There's an insanity that exists around treating a patient and waiting 90 days to get paid. And so the reason I bring this up is because it's not for the faint of heart. It's for usually the stupid, to be honest. Like for me,
True.
yeah, like we wouldn't have done it if we had known that was the path, because physical therapy is on the bottom end of healthcare. It's the lowest reimbursing. It's a very challenging business. And I've had many a mentor go, why are you doing this?
What is this?
But we're so passionate about it. So you were in this
Love it.
transition of like, you got to the scale of your company, and like you were going through a transformation within that company in such a big, like life-changing way that this was all happening after you were bishop. I don't even know how you had time to come up to breathe. And I mean that sincerely. I don't know how that period of your life was like.
It was crazy. Sometimes I think there wasn't a lot of sleep, and even when there was some sleep, sometimes you're sleeping and dreaming either about work or about church, right? and that's all good. But I do think, as kind of a side note, when we get to those points in our lives where we're trying to do our best, right? We're trying to do our best by the Lord, and I think that's we can probably all think in our lives times where maybe we made a little bit more effort than at different times or whatever, but when we're really making that effort and we're trying to magnify our calling, we look at maybe the oath and covenant of the priesthood, where if we get this blessing, that if we'll magnify our calling, that we'll be renewed. For me, the renewal was, it seemed like there was extra time. There was extra energy. Not a lot, and not a lot for R&R. But it was so that those things that were most important could get done, and that the sanity was maintained. And there was still those silver linings with my wife and I, right? Where whether it was our kids or the other things, like the Lord made a way, kind of parted the Red Sea of time, so to speak, so that we could walk through on dry ground at times when we should have been drowning.
I just, it's so interesting when you talk about how time you were renewed, and it just seems like there was always time. It reminds me of the miracle of the Lord breaking and feeding the thousands with just a few fish and a few loaves of bread, right? I think oftentimes we think how that parable is about the power of the Lord, but I think the bigger lesson, as you're talking, and this is really clear for me, is that when the Lord had created that miracle, he was showing us that he's not limited by the constraints that we are. And those constraints that we are limited by is emotional, physical strength, time being one of those. So not only can he feed the thousands off of a few loaves of bread, but he can make all things possible within our tight schedules, and almost make it seem like we do end up with more time on our hands than we think is possible, because it's not without the Lord.
You add it up, and it still doesn't make sense, and yet you know that the Lord has provided the extra loaves and fishes, right? That extra time. It came from him. And I love those moments in our lives, really, where you step back in reflection and go, I didn't do this.
Right.
It is beyond my ability, like the blessings that came, or the ability to serve the way that I was asked to, or the way that really you look around and a lot of times it's all about the people that are surrounding me at these critical times, especially my good wife, maybe counselors, maybe other people at work or whatever, that all of a sudden they stepped up in different ways and were partners in this progress. Like we never are on the straight and narrow path by ourselves, right? I think sometimes we think about being on that straight and narrow path back to eternal life, and you see somebody plodding along on their own. Yeah. Not a reality. It's hand in hand with your spouse. It's hand in hand with your family, with other people. And I do love from conference, I'm trying to remember who it was, that was from this last session. They were talking about, what's it going to be like when I stand before the Lord? What kind of questions are they going to ask? And he was saying, hey, one of the questions that may be asked is, who did you bring with you? And I think,
yeah.
What an incredible opportunity that is before us all the time, whether we're talking about temple work or serving in the ward or ministering, whatever it might be. Is the Lord going to ask us, hey, Will, nice job on this side. Who'd you bring with you?
Yeah.
Right? that was kind of an aha moment for a conference last
I
night.
love that too, because when you're talking, the first thought I have is experiences where I've been a guest in other people's wards and to see how they respond. And it's interesting because where there's a lot of members, there tends to be kind of a comfort. And I'm not ripping on it. I honestly almost always have had people come up and introduce themselves and be nice, but nothing was like when I was with my wife last year in Mozambique, in Africa, and we went to this ward, and it was wall to wall people. And the first half of the ward was just, setting apart new members. People are being baptized there like nothing else. And afterwards, every single of the 400, I mean, I counted hundreds of people, maybe 400 is too big, but it was packed. I mean, wall to wall, and it was a massive congregation. But afterwards, everyone came through and shook hands with me and the new people. It wasn't just our family. It was anyone else that was new. And I never have felt so loved. And those little acts of bringing people together, like you said, I think that's the thing the Lord's going to ask us. And I don't know if it's just the people on this life, I think, or the people in this life, thanks to the temple, they're going to be talking to us about who have we brought from our ancestors with
Sure.
us.
Yep. No,
So-
I think every time I'm in the temple, I don't know if you want to change just slightly, but I can tell you a quick experience the other
Please.
day. I was for about 6-7 months. Anna and I, my wife and I, we got to be the baptistry coordinators.
Oh, wow.
And when we were called to do it, right? And you get all these people coming up to you that have done it before, and they're like, "This is the best experience you'll ever have in the church." And I'm like, "Really? You run the baptistry? That's the best?" Oh yes, oh yes. I got to tell you, by far, it has been one of the best experiences I've ever had in my life.
Ooh, I've never heard this. What is this? What is this?
So here's just a little, for instance, right? We have a big youth group. Now you have to understand, in order to still fit the temple into the busy schedule of professional life that I'm still running, right? Anna and I go to the temple at 5:30 in the morning on Tuesday mornings,
Yes.
right? Because it's the time that fits, right? And at first I thought, no one's going to be there. Do you know who was there at 5, starting there at 6 o'clock in the morning?
Who?
There's all these youth. All these teenagers just come in. Do they come in as groups, like as wards? Not really. They're coming in with their friends. Yeah. They come in with their friends. They're coming in with their dad. They're coming in with a mom. Like, they just come in on their own. They'll come in as priest quorums, as young women's groups, sometimes. But a lot of it is just my friends and I are coming to the temple. One of the groups I was been most impressed with was the Idaho State University track team. That comes in to do. So anyway, so I'm sitting in. We've got a big youth group that's come through, and I'm in the confirmation room. And we get through some confirmations, and I look down at the card, and at this time, the individual that is being their vicarious confirmation, they're receiving the gift of the Holy Ghost, right? That we're doing it for was in the 1830s, and it just happened to be in an area that I served in as a missionary in Scotland over 30 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so we stopped for a minute, and I said, guys, I got to tell you, there's a pretty good opportunity, a pretty good chance that if this house is still standing today, I probably knocked on this person's door as a missionary to offer whoever is now living in that house the gospel. What do you guys think about this? We had this discussion with these youth. I think it was a bunch of 14-year-olds. And they're talking about, well, how do you think somebody shares the gospel with these people that we're doing the work for now? I mean, they're in the spirit world. They have to make a decision. They have to be to live according to the laws of that realm of the spirit world, which we don't have a ton of information on.
Right.
But I do know this, I mean, that if we're going to be judged according to men in the flesh, but live according to God in the spirit, in other words, this decision to be a covenant follower of Jesus Christ has to be pretty similar for me, for you, as well as somebody that didn't have the opportunity in this life and gets it there.
Yeah.
So we kind of chatted about what kind of missionaries come and knock on this person's door or maybe even 100 years ago, and they've been waiting for you to come and do their baptism and confirmation today. And this, the look on their face and the discussion that we had was a real evidence that these 14, 15-year-olds have a insight on the gathering of Israel on both sides of the veil, as taught by President Nelson, that I don't think any generation has ever fully understood.
Yes. And they are so prepared. It's almost like they can't even put language to it. And we've talked about this in other episodes, how the youth of the church are going to the temple in such large numbers. They are literally changing the construction of the temples to build more baptistries, because there's so many of these youth who are constantly going and doing baptisms. It's interesting how, like you said, there's this foreordination of how they're coming to earth to link together the families. I was at Education Week last week, or 2 weeks ago, or last week, with at BYU, and we heard a discussion from a great a speaker named Michael King, and he shared a concept with us kind of afterwards. We were talking to him, and he just said, we know that families are these units of organization. We know that before we came, we were organized in this way. And it was a personal belief of his. He goes, but I believe that we were called to the time on earth that we came. He goes, and so would say, hey, I'm going to live through the dark ages as long as Bart comes in the latter days and finds me. And this entire link was set in motion before we came to earth. So even though we don't know because of the veil, we have this internal spiritual draw of like wanting to participate in any way that we can. That's why I think you wanted to find a filling in that hole in your heart after you were released as bishop, because you were something else wasn't there. Like you had completed that journey, but there was something you had promised before you came to earth that you had to fulfill, and you knew it was in the temple and apparently in the baptistry, which is kind of amazing.
Well, I mean, it's so interesting because as an ordinance worker, one of the things that I found, let me back up just a little bit and kind of fill in the story, because I remember showing up, being set apart by a member of the temple presidency as an ordinance worker, and then kind of feeling a little bit overwhelmed because all of these retired folks that are teaching and training me had been ordinance workers for a long time. Like I didn't have a lot of these.
You were the young kid on the block, man.
Yeah. I'm like, I don't have that many grades, a little bit here, a little bit there. But what I found really quickly is that the experience that the first presidency has really focused on as we are trained in the temple is it's all about making an awesome experience, a wonderful spiritual experience for the patron. That is the focus of any training, any focus that we get from our temple presidency and from the first presidency as ordinance workers is the spiritual experience for really the participants, and really, if I can say it really bluntly, the participants on both sides of the veil. Right?
You're there to make a powerful experience for both people who are there, the people from earth and the people from their
seen and the unseen. We need to make sure that both are having an ordinance experience that is connecting them with God on the covenant path, that is clear, that is understandable, that is spiritually enlightening, that is comfortable. And one of the other things that I think has kind of just changed in the way that I've seen ordinance workers is I kind of thought it was the retired group.
Right. Well, we all think about this with temple and family history in general, that it's a retired person's game.
Yes. And I found when I went that about maybe 10% of maybe 20% of the ordinance workers that were flowing in and out were pre-missionaries.
20%?
Yeah, we're seeing all these pre-missionaries just turn in and turn out. Maybe not 20%, maybe 10%.
But even 10% would be a big number.
Yeah. And they're coming in and out. Some of them have 3 months, some of them have 2 months, some of them have 1 month, some of them have 3 weeks, whatever, just a few weeks. And they're just, their bishop sat down with them and said, hey, Will, we know you're going to Argentina in just a few weeks, but first let's have you serve as an ordinance worker in the temple.
Wow. This is such an amazing transition and transformation as well, because I don't know, were you thinking you were going to be a temple worker at your age?
No. I mean, I think, and maybe a lot of other people have thought that this is kind of a badge of spiritual honor that you get when you kind of retire and
Yes.
you've got all this time and that's kind of how I still how I see a lot of retirement opportunity. Serving in the temple is a huge opportunity once you're retired, but that's kind of how I saw it for everybody. And the first day I went in, I thought, oh, wait a minute, I've looked at this all wrong. I should have been doing this now. I can be doing this now. And I think within just a few months, the spiritual experiences that I was having on a weekly basis was probably a combination of a couple things. One is that President Nelson asked us to make that appointment with the Lord and keep it. Well,
Yes.
I'll tell you what, as an ordinance worker, if I have to be out of town, if I have a work conflict, if we're going to a family reunion, whatever, I actually have to find a sub,
Yes.
right?
It's
I
it's
can't
one
just
thing.
be
It's
like,
one thing to keep your appointment. It's another
show
thing
up.
to have to replace your position at the temple.
Yes. And so is that an obligation that I need in a busy life? Actually, it helps me so much. I would say that if you're kind of listening to this and saying, oh, when I retire and I have more time, I'm going to become an ordinance worker. This is a great thing. I'm going to tell you you're totally wrong. Doing it when you're busy, doing it right now is one of the greatest blessings I've had. And so
Wow.
maybe just a few months into this, I remember sitting in a ward council. I was serving then as the assistant ward mission leader, and the ward mission leader had to be out of town. So Brother Lyon called me up and he just said, "Hey, can you go in for me and can you just report on our missionary activities?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's great." And the bishop, out of inspiration, said, "Well, Brother McDonald, can you just tell us, since you were released as bishop, and this is the bishop that came in after me, has there been some good things that are happening in your life?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I get to serve in the temple every week. I am in the presence of the Lord and the Lord's Spirit on a weekly basis. This has been the most impactful way that I've ever been able to serve the Lord." And not necessarily perhaps in the way that I see it impacting other people, but certainly the way that it's changing my heart.
Tell me about that. What does that mean for you? Because Bart,
Yeah.
look, we've known each other a long time. You're one of those guys that I aspire to be more like. You're out there. You've been a bishop. So what is it about being in the temple every week? How has your heart changed?
So I think that I was like for a little bit of a scriptural text when I have kind of this epiphany where the Lord hits me upside the head and he's like, "Yeah, we're doing this on purpose, dude. Like, this is not on accident, right? I'm trying to help you out. I'm trying to, again, knock off those rough parts and smooth you out just a little bit more because you got a lot to go, right?" And so I would say, you remember, I think it's section 84 of the Doctrine and Covenants where Moses has this really huge struggle, right? His goal is to get everybody to the temple. That's what it's all about. And it talks in there about this epic failure that Moses has because as he's trying to get everybody up into the highest point of the mountain, which has been designated from telestial, terrestrial, celestial, just established in that same pattern, the way that the temple is symbolized, we see Moses go up into the presence of God, and his whole goal as the priesthood leader, as the prophet, is to get everybody there with him. And to be able to stand in the presence of God, and according to President Nelson's talk from this last conference, to stand with confidence in the
Yes.
presence of God, right? It's a very unique, cool talk, but anyway, maybe
Standing confidently with God. Yes.
Yes. So that's what Moses is trying to do. Moses had an epic failure. I'm not picking on Moses. Like, he probably had a tough group. I'm not picking on them either. They came from a tough background, but this preparedness to be in the house of the Lord wasn't there for them because while Moses is on top of the mountain, they're making a golden calf to worship and reverting back to prior Egyptian ways.
Yes.
And so I think he grinds down the gold and makes them eat it. But anyway, the thing that is the epic failure was probably his broken heart, right? Because he's been able to be in the presence of the Lord. He's been in the temple, and he can't get other people to come. He
Yeah.
can't get them to prepare, right? So I kind of think about it in my own life. I've always had this idea that the Lord expected me to be in the temple on a regular basis.
Right.
And as long as I do that, maybe that's what is expected, and that's all that I get out of it. And there's been some wonderful experiences that I've had over the years in kind of that level of understanding. But I got to tell you, since being there on a regular basis and being able to help others with the temple ordinances, you get this kind of Moses feel, right? You, the Lord starts nudging you on, well, who else needs to be here that's not here with us? Because the experience that you feel when you're there is, I mean, we all have this type of experience, I think, when we attend the temple, maybe sometimes more than others, depending on our preparedness. There's times where I've gone to the temple and I thought, oh, that was a good experience. There's other times where I went to the temple and I said, oh, the Lord taught me today.
Yeah.
Lord, this, and the ordinances are the same. We're not changing the dialogue a lot unless the First Presidency makes some modifications, which on a little bit of a different topic, the Lord has gone from a little bit of an Old Testament style of ordinances to now a Book of Mormon style of ordinances. The plain and precious things that are so symbolic have been just laid
spelled out.
Oh, it's incredible. It is so Christ-centered. So if I ask myself this question, where can I go in the world that I want to be closer and have a greater understanding of my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? It's going to be in the temple, hands down. That's where I need to be. And can I get there and repeat the words or listen to the phrases that he has spoken to his prophets and apostles and taught them to teach us about the plan of salvation? Well, now I get to do that on a weekly basis, on a regular basis, with this appointment that doesn't end.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think all of us have a little bit of Egyptian in us.
What does that mean?
Just a little bit of that reversion as being at the house of Israel, whether we were adopted in or by blood, like doesn't really matter. We are now, as baptized members of the church, we are of the house of Israel, and there are temptations and trials and things in our life that want to kind of get us a little bit back to Egypt.
Yeah. I get that now. You're talking about the Egyptians with the golden calf. So
Yeah.
we'll go to the temple, have a good experience, go back and maybe not watch the best movie or decide
Right.
to go do something that's not as in alignment with what we just learned.
That's right. And so the question, I think, is always in our minds: are we going to follow the covenant path, or are we going to revert back to the golden calf?
Yeah.
Right. Whatever that looks like in our lives, everybody has their individual kind of golden calf, maybe opportunities, and where are we going to put that? And that the promise that we get from President Nelson is that there's a power in this. And I want to tell you that my experience is that it is palpable. It is, I just leave the temple on a weekly basis wanting to be a better person. I want to follow Christ more fully. When I'm there, and even as I walk across the threshold at 5:30 in the morning, and I should be there at 5:20, so I'm a little bit late at 5:30. So I'm walking through the threshold. Before I step across the threshold, I'm thinking about my worthiness to be there. In other words, not that I'm perfect, don't get me wrong, none of us are, but have I been utilizing the atonement of Jesus Christ in my life this week, today, this month, in a way that would make the temple recommend questions that I'm now only asked by my priesthood leader every 2 years, but would I be able to answer those fully as I'm stepping across the threshold of the Lord's house, where it is engraven across the top, holiness to the Lord, house of the Lord.
Wow. I love that. If I can summarize what I think you said, I loved how you talked about the answer. The question that we started with was, how has your heart changed as you've become an ordinance worker at the temple? You've been bishop. Nothing has impacted you like this has. And what I heard you say was, first and foremost, is your immediate desire to bring others with you. And this immediate, outward mindset and heart set of helping your brothers and sisters, your kids, your family members, your community get there. There's a greater desire for that. I heard you also say there's a greater awareness of your worthiness, this focus of the atonement, and how you, by being there, simply being there, it's impossible to not think of the Savior and his atonement and its impact in your life and your choices and how those align. And this other thing about just as you're in there feeling his spirit, how it immediately just, it's like the analogy they give, and I forgot who gave this analogy, the boat at sea that has barnacles, how it sits in fresh water and they just fall off. That's the image I had when you were talking, is just by being there every week, not just like making a commitment, but by being an ordinance worker, having to replace your actual presence when you can't be there creates a different degree of commitment. And that commitment is what's building greater confidence in the Lord, because the greater commitment forces more decision, more commitment, and then we get confidence from there. So that's a beautiful way of saying this. And this isn't something that you grew up, or me. I didn't grow up thinking, one day I'm going to be an ordinance worker before I'm retired. But what you're saying is, prepare from anyone who's preparing to go to a mission to being retired. It doesn't matter what stage of life you're in. You're saying, consider being an ordinance worker.
Yeah.
Because of all these different things. You even said, Bart, holding you accountable, you said, even when you're super busy, especially because you're super busy, this should be the thing that you consider doing. Talk to me about that. The man or woman who's in here going, I've got little kids, I've got a job, I barely come up for air. How could I ever consider being an ordinance worker? Talk to me about that.
Absolutely. The one thing is that I know everybody's situations are different. But I also know that if we ever ask in prayer the right question, the inspired question, the question that the Lord is asking us to ask, we'll always get an answer, right? And so the challenge I throw out there is, if you don't know how, don't listen to me, because my situation is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to tell you about mine and how it kind of fit in. But if you are a young dad, a young mom, and trying to fit that in, I take it to the Lord. If you are so busy at work and you do a bunch of travel, take it to the Lord. If you are serving in a stake presidency, there's no way I have time for this, take it to the Lord. If you are a nursery leader and you just can't get it done, take it to the Lord. So I should tell you, in the busyness factor, we actually tried an evening session assignment first. My wife and I did. It just didn't work.
How come?
And so it was a race. I want to say it was every Thursday night. So it was a race from work, from like 6 a.m. until the time that I had to be at home to kind of meet up with her to get changed at 4:30 to be there. It was so stressful that when I went into the temple, I was on edge.
Yeah.
It was hard. And it's okay when it's hard, and it's okay when it's a sacrifice, but we were looking for a better answer. And for us, when we prayed about it and discussed it, we came up with, well, what if we made it first in our day and just flip this around? Yeah, I can always stay a little bit longer at work or have to address this or that. And when I sat down with my new business partners, was we were doing this merger, some of them that are members of the church and some of them that aren't, I told them I got a couple of obligations in my life that are just not changeable. One of them is I am a temple worker in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Pocatello Temple, and that's got to stay. That's got to stay in place. I can't have that change. And they were like, oh, okay. We don't know what that means in some cases. Other people did, and that always brings up good gospel subjects. But talking about the way that it kind of changes your heart. Perhaps it changed my heart because it helped me to solidify, put the Lord first, put my temple experience first. I know that a lot of times in my life, if there's anything I've been guilty of, is maybe being a little bit addicted to work. I love it. I love what I do. I love serving. It's a truth.
I'm laughing because it's a shared addiction.
Yeah, and it needs to be kept in check, right? It just happens to be at this time in my life, one of the things that I could be very guilty of if I'm not careful is still, now that my kids are out of the house, is not giving the one relationship on this earth that is most important, and that is my spouse, enough of an emphasis, enough of a priority. And she and I had this discussion even today. We were talking about this path that we've had as we merged our company and did some other things. And she said, you kind of checked out on me a little bit in this deep dive, in this transition for about the first almost 4 or 5 months, and are now kind of trying to settle back into and keep your priorities at a better level, at a kind of work-life balance, right? I think that's what
Yeah.
we call it now. And as I'm thinking about that conversation that she and I just had just today, I would say there was probably two things that helped me keep my balance in keeping my relationship with her at the paramount pinnacle of focus, even though I was too distracted and maybe working a little bit too hard in another area. And that was, she and I had this wonderful opportunity to be at the sacrament table each week together, and also working in the temple for several hours together. And I can't think of any other than maybe serving as senior missionary couple, right?
Yeah.
Is there any other opportunity that you can think of, Will, where the Lord calls you to serve, and often you get to serve side by side with your spouse?
No. Or now, do you see her at the temple? I mean, I'm imagining because you're both working in the baptism.
Yeah, we did that for about 7 months, and so we were side by side there. And what was crazy is that we're both a little type A. I know that would be hard to imagine, but we're both a little bit type A, and we work well together, right? Sometimes that doesn't always gel for people if they're both kind of got this similar personality type. She has her strengths, I have my weaknesses. We blend really well. What we found when we were organizing the baptistry is we sat down together and emphasized her strengths, and she kind of made up for some of my weaknesses, then vice versa. And I felt like we have never been more cohesive and united in serving the Lord than we were in serving the temple. That doesn't always happen in our assignments, but I'll tell you what, whenever we possibly can, it's interesting because the shift coordinators are always trying to find a way that, let's say we're working at a Vail assignment, that I can work opposite of Anna. And there's no more powerful experience that I've ever had in my life than probably the day that we were sealed together, and being able to kneel across the altar and to be sealed for time and all eternity. And I think a lot of people that have had that blessing happen in their lives, they look at that day and that moment and go, oh, I want to feel that again. I'm promising that in the temple, serving with your spouse as an ordinance worker and many other ways, you can feel that again and again and again. I walk out of there grateful for my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, for his atoning sacrifice, for the renewal, for repentance, for cleanliness, knowing the myriad of mistakes that I make every day. But I also feel this unity with Anna that I've never captured in any other type of church service. It's amazing.
It's so in parallel too, when we think about the doctrine of temples and what they're meant for, and they're all about sealing God's children as one giant celestial family. I'm realizing I'm being taught in real time, Bart, as you're speaking, about how the opportunity to go serve in the temple with our family members is taking that same spirit of Elijah and applying it to our immediate family on earth. It's not just connecting us to our ancestors, and not just taking the blessings from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to us so that we can seal our ancestors through that great connection. It's to connect the immediate temporal family that we have together. And there's no other more impactful way that we can do that through the spirit of Elijah. That's part of that application. And I'm saying this not from a place of like, I've known this, I'm realizing it right now. And I say that because I've never worked as a temple ordinance worker. Clearly, as if I'm going to continue this show, I'm going to have to.
Gotta do it.
And I'm like, the whole time I'm like, oh, I think I'm supposed to do this now. But it's true that Heather, my wife, she's a producer of the show. As we spend time, first of all, we've been married for a long time. We've gone to the temple together off and on. Since the start of the show, we've been making an effort to go together. And it truly is the best part of the show for me, is the fact that I get to have this thing that we talk about in between going to the temple And so it connects it into one giant link. And so like last night, she was talking about guests that she wanted to have on or topics that we wanted to cover. And it's like the spirit of Elijah is in our home just because we're thinking and acting on something that we've created to be part of this journey in our unique way. And we all have our own ways of doing it uniquely. But being a temple ordinance worker is one of those things, again, I don't think most people consider. I think they think of it as the rich, the people with more time on their hands, the older retired people. And the culture of that is shifting so dramatically. Just as temples are being built with multiple baptism fonts, we are now being invited to come and serve. There weren't that many temples to operate and serve in before. That was part of the problem before. Now there's so many, and there's so many that we have an opportunity to step in and take one shift. And I'll tell you this, every single time I go, when I'm in there, I notice the workers. I'm honestly always, there's a distance between me and them in a good way. There's some sort of like, they're there to I feel their love for me. I feel the ordinance workers' love for me to the point where when finally I'm at a point where I'm going more regularly, where I'm recognizing certain names at certain times, and I'm not like necessarily developing like, I'm not high-fiving as I'm walking through, but it's this thing of familiarity to where those are my brothers and sisters. And so I think stepping on that side of the counter, so to speak, all dressed in white, must give you some additional insights. You said something earlier, Bart, I want to tap into. You talked about how you guys are there to make sure that every participant on this side and on the other side of the veil have the best experience they can possible. What does that look like for you in that journey for both sides of the veil?
Yeah, I think if you were to interview maybe ordinance workers from even 5 to 10 years ago, they might say it is the ability to have a certain ability to memorize things and do things accurately. Yeah. That is shifted.
Totally.
It is having the Spirit and being able to prayerfully prepare so that the delivery of the Lord's words and his ordinances there can be felt with a spiritual power and impact. You'll probably notice when you're attending the temple now that many of the words associated with the ordinances are on cards on the wall. We didn't used to have that. The emphasis is not the perfection of delivery in memorization. It is the focus of trying to do it the Lord's way.
Yes.
And whenever I have a certain responsibility associated with an endowment session where I'm going to lead that endowment session, there's some important parts where I just feel like I have to be spiritually prepared. And a lot of my personal opportunity is recognizing when that responsibility is going to come up this week, when I'm going to have that opportunity, and to spiritually prepare, whether that be by prayer, or by fasting, by asking the Lord for help and doing so. And I'll tell you, just like any other spiritual experience that we've ever had personally in our lives with personal revelation or anything, the more we're prepared, the more that the Lord blesses us. The more we ask, the more we receive. It really is the law of heaven. That's the way these things work, and it's just so available. It's so available in the temple at the drop of a hat.
Yes.
It's incredible.
Well, I love the preparation. This is so educational for me. It reminded me of a story that happened to me when I was going to the temple doing initiatories once. There was a young man who I knew, from before, and he was on a service mission, which, by the way, I say this every chance I can. The greatest heroes for me in the church are service missionaries. They're the men and women that I look up to the most.
Yep.
And it's not to minimize any other type of person who serves a proselyting mission or doesn't serve a mission but serves the military or just the Lord in their own way. But I'm telling you, service missionaries for me are my heroes. And this young man was really working through reading the initiatory piece of it and the spirit that that young man brought, because he was trying so hard. I just wanted to hug him, not because I felt bad. I didn't feel like, oh, he's trying so hard and he's failing. That's cute. Like it was quite the opposite. There was a strength and a commitment and a showing up of how the Lord would want him to show. And that moved me. His spiritual preparedness and his effort put into my spirit in check and made me want to be better. It made me hear the words clearer. He was reading imperfectly the words, but my soul was hearing them in the most perfect form that I have ever heard those words being said before. And I think when you talked about that, that's what I heard, was that the preparation is unique for all of us. And for some, that is to have it completely memorize those different ordinances and to be able to show up. And I've had those moments where I'm like, wow, I feel like I'm with an apostle. But there's the almost authentic, that's what it is. It's the authentic, intentional effort that you are putting in as an ordinance worker that starts to duplicate on our spirits and also on the other side of the veil to inspire people to come to Christ. Yeah. And that is so beautiful. Bart, this is so great. What would you say to people who are on the fence around this? Like they're like feeling, I'm talking about the person who's like, they're feeling it right now. And they're just like, I don't know. What would you say to them?
Well, I'll tell you what you're feeling really is that the extension of the Spirit giving you that nudge. We'd kind of talked about those spiritual nudges. Later on, Will, you talked about that. Hey, that's the spirit of Elijah, especially as it comes to the temple. And it can apply to the living and the dead, to our ancestors as well as our living family. If I could relate one more story on this issue, I was in the baptistry one day, and we've been finishing up some baptisms, and it's always a good conversation as we start confirmations. And I was standing at the door. I wasn't even involved in what was going on in the room. But I watched a dad walk in to do confirmations with his daughter that was probably, well, she had to be 11, right? Because it was in January. In fact, it was probably just about the 1st of February. It had been maybe 4 weeks into the year, if my math was, if I recall this correctly. Anyway, and I stepped in for a moment as they were getting ready, and I just asked this little girl, I said, hey, how many times have you been to the temple? And she said, well, this is my 4th. And I think it was like, basically, it had been 4 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Since the beginning of the year. Since she could have a temple recommend as an 11-year-old turning 12. And the most incredible moment, speaking about why we want to be there, not only to get closer to our Savior Jesus Christ, to knock off those rough edges that the Lord is trying to help us with, to maybe be more united with our spouse and an opportunity to serve with them in something that is so remarkable. But this dad turns to me, looks down at his daughter, and says, I am so proud of my daughter that she wants to go to the temple every week. I'm going to work so hard to make sure I can come with her. And what was so amazing was not his statement. I think any dad that had an 11-year-old daughter that said,
Yeah.
Dad, will you take me to the temple every week? We'd be like, oh, yeah, I got to step up.
Yeah,
That's
not a common thing. Not a common thing. Very special, for sure.
No, but what was so amazing at the Spirit just seared it into my heart was the look on this little girl's face when the dad said, I'm so proud of her. Right? Not in a prideful way, but I look up to my 11-year-old daughter. Look at this spiritual giant in this tiny body.
Yeah.
What can we all learn, right? I think as an ordinance worker, if you're struggling to get the time, pray and ask the Lord how it can happen. If you want to be an ordinance worker, right? If you're thinking about it and I just don't know how to get it. And the Lord might come back and say, not now. I don't know. But I think for many of us, maybe a majority of us, it is now. The Lord will open the Red Sea, right? And give you some time as you magnify your opportunity in a calling to serve him. And you'll be able to walk through on dry ground, even when it doesn't seem like it's going to make it possible. And you'll look back at this experience serving as an ordinance worker in the temple and say, how many blessings did I receive from this literal appointment with the Lord on a weekly basis? And then how much did I feel the spirit of Elijah when I was there? How much did I feel the gathering of Israel on both sides of the veil? How much did I feel lives changing around me? And what greater opportunity to really become a true disciple of Jesus Christ than to be in his house. I probably should have brought my wife on to speak after this, because she would be like, oh, this has changed me in the same way. In a unifying way, the Lord is changing us together. I can't find a better way to serve than to be in the temple.
Bart, thank you so much for being on the show. This was such a great episode. I'm hoping people will listen to this and start to challenge the notion of what it looks like to serve in the temple. And we're all at different stages. I just want to say this to everyone who's listening, if you're at this point, is for some of us, it might be just trying to get our recommend. Maybe we're not even members of the church. Maybe you're investigating, maybe you're listening to this, and this is like way down the road. But I think what Bart is doing is just showing what's possible. So no matter where we are in our journey, as he said, take it to the Lord. What's the next step? Because these steps aren't work. There's all these works that we do, and oftentimes we think there's all these works that we have. These are the joyful ones. These are the ones that produce the faith, so that we feel like there's less works overall in our lives that we have to do, because the things that matter most get done first. So just wherever you are in your journey, wherever you are, just ask the Lord what's next. And if you are one who's been passionate and going often, and or maybe looking for a way to really step up your game, so to speak, to draw closer to the Savior, just pray. See what the Lord has to say. And I promise, just as Bart will, that you will get an answer. Bart, thanks again for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Will. This has been such a joy just to be able to talk about.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode of Temple Bound. If you enjoyed today's show, make sure to join us over on Instagram at Temple Bound Podcast to receive additional information as well as previews of our upcoming episodes. See you over there.